Welcome to Masterclass, YouTube Masterclass. That's what we're doing here. I'm Dr. Aaron Sheley. I got my PhD at California Institute of the Arts, which requires multiple PhDs to obtain, multiple masters to obtain the California Institute of the Arts Masters. The American Film Institute rewarded me with a master's. USC, where I went to undergrad, also awarded me for a master's, but there's several schools that have given me a PhD, and the license to be a professor works in my hometown at CMU, where I was a teacher of psychology for a while and taught kids at the radio station, and still am an underwriter there. But that's just because it's the local school, and you should always take stock in your local school when you become a professor or when you yearn to be a professor. Always go for the local guys, because that's where you're going to find most of your connections to everyone else, especially in the remote type of looking at classes we've merged into. They're still live classes, but this class actually, while seemingly live, is remote, and then I record this and then send it out. But I don't correct anything in it. That's what's so weird. Is like there's been a couple of them even in this semester, this summer semester, that have blown up and have been like, that's an obvious mistake, And I was like, well, I tried to blend it in because you only live once and you can only really lecture once. In fact, that reminds me, we might have to do that next time or something, is get out the Harry Potters and try that one again, because we did a Harry Potter one. And that's the reason this one is silent, even though we're going to talk about some explosively loud films. Now, I know I went over a lot of this technology and we're doing a class called Film Special Effects. It's 409. There's 4 lectures left. This is one of the last 4 lectures, and this lecture goes on about an hour. But when I left you with Jazz Singer, even as a special effect movie, why? Because it was sound. Sound was wired in all the theaters, and sound was used for the music, the musical. Everything had been filmed possible in the silent era we see, except perhaps the Busby Berkeley musicals of the 30s and 40s. And he was the one behind Golden Diggers of 1933, Busby Berkeley. And I think there's something to be said about Busby Berkeley, that he really formed situations that were exactly like the book musical, like the book of the music, or the book even the book musical was based on, or the book that holds all the information about the text, the singing, the songwriting, etc. But in all these movies that they were wiring for sound and that they were doing the book musical, Busby Berkeley really took it to a challenging way of manipulating the visuals to move with the image. Now, we learned last year in spring, that the avant-garde movies of the 1920s and 1930s, pure cinema, cinema pure, that was the final. Well, those were special effects in many ways, because they were animating to the sound of the music, whether they were silent at all or not. Most silent films were animated even to match the music that was playing, even on keyboard or on orchestra, depending on the budget of the film. But at movie palaces, even in the silent era, there were big orchestras that were set up to play the movie music. And who knows if some guy's reading the narrative dialogue. And that's later into the 20s when they started having those dialogue people, but it was just getting closer and closer to this like Bazanian evolution of total myth of total cinema. Now we've got sound, and color was already there, and sound was already there in an early experimental phase, but didn't really get used until 1927 when the Jazz Singer came out. And that's all important, because I'm prequeling the films I'll be looking at today, and we'll get a prequel of them. I won't tell you what this one is. It's Mulholland Drive, and we've been over it before, but we're going back over it, and this time we're looking at its special effects and the ways that style can be special effects, is what I'm kind of looking at today, because you see, with Singing in the Rain, this being the best musical of all time next to Meet Me in St. Louis. Now, Meet Me in St. Louis has this really good special effect that you kind of have to follow it, where they do these huge paintings of like a beautiful shot in St. Louis or Boston or somewhere, where it's this like carriage, and it's like rich mansion of a house, and girls in there like Gone with the Wind dresses. No, seriously. And By the time you get to Singing in the Rain from Meet Me in St. Louis, you remember in Meet Me in St. Louis, they zoomed into the picture and then it became real, or they zoomed out and it became a picture. And you match the picture exactly to the picture on the wall, exactly to the picture that's behind it with the actual house and buggy. And then when they go into Singing in the Rain, these are jam packed with special effects, and I think the reason for it is Busby Berkeley, because his special effect was adding like these giant like rotundas. And he'd have these rotundas, and I'm not just talking about how Esther Williams swam in rotunda. No, I'm talking about these rotundas that go to the top, and they have to time them with the music and time everything they're doing with the music, and so you can see the crudity of 1929, where it's like these beautiful musicals, Broadway melody, winning Best Picture, but mostly it's because of the innovations with sound, and it had almost crippled the image back to a cube where you'd have to have the microphone in the room and you couldn't really move the camera around anymore, which for someone like Louis Fouillard would have been fine because he didn't really do any sound films, which is already another questionable aspect of his own life and how he got out of it. But like, I mean, I'm telling you, I've seen Irma Vep. Irma Vep still rides somewhere in the industrial district of LA, South LA. Everybody knows Irma Vep's still out there. But Fouillard didn't transition to sound. There's something we didn't know, because actually his shots were manipulated so they could have put microphones in the set. Meanwhile, his films have the flip color where you touch the switch on the wall and it changes from daytime, which is yellowish, to blue, which is bluish. And I was just doing it there to cover up, if I cover up this light and don't let it through, then you're getting a different shade of my face. I mean, these are all effects we work on, right? And I'm just making like animal cartoons back here, but Singing in the Rain is a great movie because it does discuss the very thing of the jazz singer and the route to sound film and what was so cool about sound film. And Singing in the Rain does it in not an entirely undated way. That all the songs are beautiful to Meet Me in St. Louis and Singing in the Rain. And to pick Best Musical, I'm going to have to go with Singing in the Rain, because even the flawed section where he's doing the Broadway melody is being totally crushed by special effects. And some say it's a weakness of the film to pull away from just the natural dancing and the natural cartoonish way of Donald O'Connor and the natural, like, jokes of the movie, like when they crash that plane into a barn and he's like, dignity, always dignity, you know? I mean, there's some funny jokes. The whole point is it's Hollywood on Hollywood. And that's what I'm getting to today. Not just about a stylistic reference, but Hollywood on Hollywood. And what two better films than Singing in the Rain and Mulholland Drive? Now, Singing in the Rain is not always one they pick for Hollywood on Hollywood. I've actually seen people even pick Tales of the Chrysanthemum, The Last Chrysanthemum, for their favorite film movie about film. But the film movie about film is usually because the movie itself is about a director, an actor, a producer, and like in Godard's Contempt in 1963, once you have all the elements of the film, those are the elements of the film forever, and that unless your film faces denigration, even volumers of it, if you're making a film about film, then it doesn't necessarily approve of Hollywood on Hollywood. Godard getting Hollywood actors to play foreign directors, kind of the same thing. What we've got is an instance of self-reflexivity. Now make a note of this. Self-reflexivity has been discussed and rediscussed in so many ways. But what it really is the expressive act of the artist drawing attention to what characteristically defines him as an artist in relationship to the work he's doing. Did everybody catch that? That's self-reflexive. It's not just like, haha, I'm showing you what I'm doing by showing you what I'm doing. Because that could just be a making of. Which making ofs are self-reflexive in a sense, in a heavy-handed way, because then they're saying, well, we're remaking it and that's what we're doing. So you've got to be generous to the films that don't stagnate in their tempo, and that's almost every film since Busby Berkeley, because it's like he put a metronome, this big metronome, in the middle of the music, and we're just all following the lead. The camera's following the metronome. But here Gene Kelly co-directs with Stanley Donen. Now they had done On the Town, which was all of these musicals required props and special effects. There's this scene in Singing in the Rain in the Broadway Melody where Sid Charisse comes running out in this big floating, like, her dress is floating in this like expressionistic way, and it's floating way up here and it's floating way down here. Nobody knows how to control her floating banner. And I'm going, this is in-camera special effects are wild in Singing in the Rain. And I'm saying their cartoonish effects are really good, but again, that scene with the it dissolves to a dream within a dream, and they're saying as part of this show they're going to do a Broadway melody, just like the Broadway melody of 1940, for instance, with Fred Astaire. You have all these musicals with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, and they really lifted the music up to a heavenly level. And I don't mean like heaven as in like a place where Christians go or whatever. I mean heaven is in like now we're all looking up to where you've gone and you've all ascended away and you've transcendently meditated by dancing off the stage. And the special effect is always the dancing, the tap dancing. Everybody's into it. Debbie Reynolds, she's Carrie Fisher's mom. And Donald O'Connor. So you see, you have this very slapsticky cast, but what they're doing is making a movie about a movie self-reflexively. Stanley Donen is saying, this is what Hollywood's like when they make movies. We're going to set it in the 1920s, but it's way about how they do it today in the 50s, you know. They probably just found out in the 50s, some of these guys, that they even had sound film. Like Griffith was waking up after a World War II nightmare, you know, as Madame Butterfly in prison saying he's a communist. Doing everything wrong yet again. No, I'm not judging that as wrong, but those are the types of eccentric things that go on about movies, and nobody's dared make the Griffith story, and I hope no one ever does, because the Griffith story is a sensitive one, and it's got everything from how he liberated Holocaust camps to how he reinforced lynch mobs against African Americans. And I think he didn't want to really reinforce it, but his will was on that side of the coin enough times that I just don't say that just because I know he was best friends with Louis Armstrong. But remember, we're adding one big special effect, the weed budget. The weed budget usually isn't mentioned, but now that it's legal to talk about weed, there's a certain amount of a weed budget lent for a movie that has a lot of weed scenes in it. And I'm kind of joking because usually it's for the behind the scenes, but it's like the extras that pile up for movies are really enhanced when you do have marijuana because it's such an expressive medium and it exaggerates everything, you know. And we see L. Ron Hubbard in his book talking about how weed sometimes makes you want to exaggerate things. And I'll tell you, I exaggerate all the time, but sometimes it ends up being right. Like, I've just got to tell you, class, doing what I did to get my PhDs and win a Pulitzer and win the Guinness Book of World Records and all these things, have become a Masterclass professor when it can, you know, all those things are really hard to believe. I understand that. And I've heard BS stories too, but they're even today telling me they've never seen anything like that. And I'm not bragging about who I am or what I've done. But what I'm saying is I had one of the hardest workloads of all of any student ever in history, they're saying. And they didn't feel bad about it, which they don't need to because they knew I could do the work, and that was their stock in me. But there's times I've exaggerated the story, been like, well, I took a degree from all 50 states like they offered. But then I found out my references wouldn't cover it. You know, I just been going it over with people that aren't even in school, and then some could relate and some couldn't handle it, and some were like, oh, this is great, this mysterious PhD that's coming upon Aaron because he's been in school 20 years. And I'm not the same drag racer I was 20 years ago. But let's take a look at self-reflexivity in Stanley Donen's case. That what he's doing is he's pointing the camera at the camera. When you point the camera at the camera, you're always getting a sense that you're making a movie about the making of movies. Now, this one isn't going to leave you like the big knife where everybody's pissed off and doing the contempt thing and throwing knives around or whatever in the studio. This is the optimistic view that film was meant to become sound and color and big and spectacular, and even if they had to dub voices, which they did for a while in the 50s, But they're saying they did it here because the old actress had an annoying voice, didn't transition to sound. Ha ha ha. We all get the film critic joke. Stanley Donen being a film critic and saying ha ha ha. Even back then they were biased, or whatever. The point I'm trying to make is these musics that are timed to the image is as hard as animation to do because you have to know where the image is moving and where the music is moving in terms. So you look at the music on a track, even for this making, and it's like it's sound on film, and the sound waves run on the film, so you know to cut the images according to where the sound waves fall as you've analyzed the sound waves in according to that song and how they particularly translate out on your waveogram. This is the beginning of a sound effects track. And if you don't think this movie had sound effects tracks, well, remember the four main tracks are dialogue, background, sound effects, and sound special effects. Sound special effects? Because sound effects is where you can actually do Foley and make it sound like someone's walking down the hall. The sound special effects are when a laser gun is firing and you're again using your conjecture from your own inner monologue as what a laser gun is supposed to sound like, even though it was probably lost in space that defined for all media what a laser gun firing should be. And I don't know. One thing I love about TV, and it's too bad we haven't had a TV lecture since, and I'm realizing now that TV is the great medium. That one of the things I love about TV is that it's on everywhere all the time, and some of the channels are on at the same time to about millions of people. It's so expensive to make a TV show. And then when you're running a TV station, think about it. You got all the stuff that's coming in from the satellite. Then you're recording it and logging it. And then you got all the stuff that's going onto the show out on the other satellite. It's like $1 million a minute to run the place. But here's what's weird. The commercials wrap up on so many different channels that even the impressions are bigger than anything you could get on Facebook because now millions of people have seen your commercial, depending on how much money. So now you're making money back, but it's still have to pay the whole apparatus to go. And there's about hundreds of those satellite stations that represent the different main stations, and they have their own local news. And I thought, well, that's harder than going to Hollywood and getting a job, because now you got this $1 million a second rule, and you've got to make like 10 million a second so that everybody gets $10 a second. And then the lowly production assistant like me figures out what everybody else makes, tells payroll to pay them, and walks away because that was the only other job I needed to have all the jobs there at one station. And my local affiliate, CBS, may it be a beautiful place forever. And my local affiliate, KJCT, which I totally love. The job there, too, is really great. But I was going through this hard time in college where I was, like, twitching out and stuff. But you would have loved me as a teacher then, because I would have just, like, been like, well, Citizen Kane, let's show. Whoa, Rosebud sent me over. Because I'll admit, class, even while I was going through some of that college, I did nip at the bottle a little bit, and I'm glad we weren't here to talk about the struggle or like anything like that. I'm not drinking anymore. You can imagine that my girlfriend's like that better, but we're not here to talk about me. That's a funny special effect to make like characteristic styles. But in a movie about making movies, what I like about this one is such a classical movie that it seems like it was meant to be made just like it was made, meticulously. Like most movies about making movies, there's always some turbulence, like in The Big Knife, when there's turbulence between the actors, or in Contempt when the producer and Fritz Lang aren't getting along, and that's really Fritz Lang in Contempt. But it's not that it has to have a huge conflict to really make it need sound effects. I mean, a lot of these movies need sound effects. The carnivalesque nature of this film needs sound effects. And the way that they dance and time and edit to the music is a Busby Berkeley technique, that you time the waveform to the image. And I'm not sure that Busby Berkeley had a waveform, but he had a way of timing the image to the music by reconciling where the music would fall upon the image, which is something they've been working on since the silent era. Yeah, going back to the film on film, one of the things that makes Tales of the Last Chrysanthemum and Singing in the Rain so interesting is it's like these decades gone by that they're retrospective of, and they're looking at it as though those were movements that were meant to happen, and now we're already so high above it. We're so big because now we can remember the wiring of sound in all the studios to be this like hilarious subplot of Singing in the Rain. How they didn't they all transition to sound film because one lady's got like sounds like me after I've had a pack of Camels. I mean, she's just got this raspy voice. And I'm not trying to say that my voice is anything golden fluent pipes or anything, and I would have probably not made the sound era. Still crossing my fingers to see if I'll make the sound era. See, I'm still making mostly silent films, and that's why there's no music in this masterclass, because I felt we'd go silent and deal with some musicals. But the next one I got isn't a musical, and we'll get to it just temporarily. These two disc special editions are the best, aren't they? And this is actually the DVD, and it doesn't have the outer casing, so it's not worth as much, but it's still hard to track down. This one I got at Target, and it provokes all the loveliness of the movies and going to them. And in making the film, let me just say, in a weird way, it's see-through, it's transparent when it comes to the classical Hollywood editing. 180 line, shot reverse shot, match on action, match on sight. Those kind of match on action, match on sight, match on movement, that is action. And then you've got the editing all twisted in this Hollywood way so that it's blinking along like there's some comptroller picking the best angle every 3 seconds of the shot. And then you've got the great apparatus of TV when they're live and there's millions of dollars are going into it. And these live cameras are shooting in all directions, and you've got to be able to coordinate what's going on to the actual picture of the screen at home and picking the most ideal picture out of about 135 pictures that it could be of cameras set up around an average station. Can't be an easy job, and these typhoons of the media that go unrecognized all the time. I mean, you have these guys on TV, they'll type up a report, and then it'll even be about TV. It'll be interesting. They'll be like, this is how I do my job. But they have to make a script of it, they have to do a story about it, they have to get guests, they have to do a bunch of filming, they have to get the natural sound, they have to get the voiceovers the way they want them to. Then they have to edit it themselves, and this is all has to be in a day. Every day that goes by needs more news. There's always news, and you can always go look up the good news. Hey, I even work for my local paper, right? Make It Local, Daily Sentinel, and it's only as the social media manager, which I haven't managed too much in a while, but I have actually dropped some bombshells on that. So if you want to hear some secret Easter eggs from me, and my thanks to Matt Clickstein on how all that went. Now, the one thing, again, I've got to mention is not all films about filmmaking end happily. This one is like a film history film on its own, almost by accident, because the characters are coming out of the jazz era and going into the sound era of film. And Debbie Reynolds, may the best voice win, has the best voice of the movie, and that's how she wins. The other special effects worth mentioning. Well, on the Broadway melody scene, there's a scene while Gene Kelly is doing an in-camera effect where he's standing on this podium, and as the podium begins to rise, and they're doing this to kind of show that what it looks like to make a Broadway melody number for a show in the 50s, but that show is supposed to be set in the 30s, so it's kind of confusing. But you see Gene Kelly lift up in his gotta dance voice, and he's gotta dance, and he's being lifted up over the frame, and he's actually just doing what I'm doing and coming closer to the frame, and then he like stops, and then in the background there was a matte paint, and that had neon lights on it, and that's how that scene is done. It makes him look like he's on an elevator, but really he's just getting closer to the camera. He's just kind of standing up and getting closer to the camera. I know you don't believe me, but if you watch that scene enough, you can kind of see how it's a process. It almost seems like a digital process, but it's a dissolve process where they would lap key on the greatest number of not pixels, the greatest number of cells on a film cell that were covered by the distinctive dark color of the dissolve and then the brightening out on either side of it. Or just brightening out completely on both sides of it, but getting murky in the middle. And those dissolves, like I've never seen dissolves like George Stevens dissolves. George Stevens in that movie with Montgomery Clift, The Place in the Sun, Elizabeth Taylor. That movie has the best lap dissolves of any narrative. Do I see a show of hands? At the very beginning, they do the taxi driver Jim Morrison dissolve, where Montgomery Clift's hanging out his thumb, getting into a car, and it's already evaporated him in the dissolve like 3 lines back from where he was standing, what could have been hours ago, but we can't tell because the time is gone. So, just to put it under wraps, the reason that I brought this up, other than the Busby Berkeley time the image to meet the wavelength, if there's climactic moments in the film, make a climactic moment in the song. If there's a part of the song that emphasizes the film, make sure they match up. If the music's timed and the movie's timed, which it is all timed, again, to a giant metronome in the sky, right? But that it's timed out makes it an intricate to all the different tracks they had. I'll have to come later. I'm sorry. I'll have to come later. I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of something.
Okay, I just have mail for you.
Okay, slip it under the door.
Well, I gotta open it with you.
Okay, I'll be there in a little while. Give me 30 minutes. Sorry about that, everybody. That was my mail person dropping by. That's cool, though, because it's no big deal. I live in these, like, small apartments, and there's, like, one big building, so, like, they come to the door, and I don't mean to be rude to them or anyone or you guys. We're taking a class, right? It's a Harvard class, and all of a sudden we're getting knocks at the door, and that would only be an excuse if they were like 5 minutes to the set, Mr. Sheley. Usually it's like, I'm gonna push record and find the set. That's how I go about my movie, and I don't even get drunk anymore. So anyway, the thing is we're singing in the rain. You get this totally like almost cartoonish activist about like why it's natural that film had to change to from jazz to sound in the cinema. And Bazan totally backs the story 100% and even goes so far to say that Ben-Hur is more realistic than the Bible. Which really everybody knows Ben-Hur is more realistic than the Bible because William Wyler can't but help with the realism even in a fantasy land such as that. But the original Ben-Hur was a sight to behold as well. And the special effects in those kind of war movies is like Birth of a Nation, like disaster movies like Earthquake and Towering Inferno, where the disaster movie like Birth of a Nation, Civil war movies, The Day After Tomorrow, the whole world's destroyed, post-apocalyptic. Some source of time in history was so drastic that all the world collapsed and ended. And you can say that with Birth of a Nation, and that starts a whole disaster genre as one of the redeemable things about that movie. Because it is a giant disaster movie, from Atlanta burning down to that dude punching everybody in the shop. And it is one of the most redeemable factors of that movie is that it's a disaster movie. It's an end of the world. It's post-apocalyptic. It's like Birth of a Nation. They're saying it just because it's coming to an end. It's an irony used in the title. I'm telling you what. So I'm not trying to ravagely distinct Birth of a Nation because it has some horrific moments of dated anti-politic mishmash, and I don't like how they just like chose to give the government control of the film. But like I said, Griffith was the one supplying the weed all the time, so you can't say that all his eccentricities would have gotten me kicked off the set. I'm also the Griffith chair at USC. I'm deciding what to do with that spot other than keep the films playing that are like True Heart Susie or The Idle Dancer. There's all these movies that you could show, and Idle Dancer has some sort of auspicious things in it with colonialism. I'm not really sure what that is, but there are Griffith movies like Broken Blossoms. I kind of choked on that one last time I saw it. It was pretty deep and intense and modern, and some of the modern things with even the women were Eyes Wide Shut, offensive, and Broken Blossoms. the last time I saw it, but it was such a beautiful film that I couldn't but help but think that Griffith was all over the map with his style. And Griffith did not make a movie about making a movie. He might have, in the early days of Tin Pan Alley, made a movie called The Cameraman a couple of times. See, because The Cameraman is Buster Keaton, and he was an independent filmmaker like John Cassavetes. And he started doing his own independent films. And Buster Keaton totally covered all the drills. And he showed up in Sherlock Jr. in a movie about movies where he keeps changing from scene to locale to scene to locale as the film changes and his character stays in the same spot and reacts to the next scene. I mean, just these kind of logistic. And then he made this one Cameraman where this monkey films everything at the end of the movie, and it ends up that he turns it in, and it ends up looking like an avant-garde film that the monkey recorded. So like now you've got like these films about film already in the spikingly hilarious way. Now I'm going to take you down this road as we go to the second half of this masterclass, and I'm really lucky to have students like you because you've really been paying attention in these classes, and I know a few people out there have graduated from 4 units of film criticism and feel pretty badass about it, whatever school they chose to attach it to, right? Or several or 2 schools split or whatever with the credits. I mean, you can be creative the way that you collect your units, even if you're not in one of those 3 schools which are sponsored for this show. Coursera could see this as an equivalent of something at your school that you could attach to it. Unfortunately, we can only sponsor so many without like really overdoing what we teach. But since it's a master class, I'm not teaching several classes, then I figured the 3 professorships, USC, Calarts, and Harvard, all go hand in hand, because then you're like, well, we can all help each other build a Harvard film school, which there kind of is this ether of one. You see this sort of form of where the substance will cometh. And USC and Calarts are the best film schools on the face of the earth. Calarts is the best animation school. Everybody knows that. Music school, yeah. It's a real professional place. I mean, you can't win at Calarts unless you're a pro. And I know I've always been often said that I'm no pro. And I often say I'm no pro. But maybe, I'm the one guy that's a pro at not being pro. But I'm a pro at not being pro. And I guess that makes me a pro in some sense. I don't know. But no, I'm saying that, like, the technical craft of the cinema and the reason they do production design the way they do is to fit the color scheme picked by the director and cinematographer that they're going to be shooting the movie in. And so when they pick this color scheme out, the cinematographer is left with kind of the logistics of what he's going to have to do for lighting and shading, especially in moving. And then the worst job of all, focus pulling. Now, if focus pulling is the only reason Andy Warhol's Poor Little Rich Girl has a special effect in it, I don't mind. And he must have just randomly focused it perfect. He touched it. Andy Warhol touched it and went back in focus. You know. But when a focus is being pulled, that means the focus changes every little register the film makes from away from the original shot, which, since most cinema is moving, the shot as well as the image can be moving. And sometimes the shot's stagnant, like most silent films, is like a frame that you get all the action in. But most films nowadays have kind of the film moving one way and the character moving the other, like you see some of that coming up in the modernist Taxi Driver. Which I don't even know if they were using squibs in that gunfight. I've talked about squibs and how they explode blood on you. Well, I don't know what they did to make Taxi Driver look so realistic. Maybe they prayed to Jesus and brought him back to life. I don't know. Maybe Jesus was that cartel member down the street. I don't know. But all I know is they did something in Taxi Driver to make that look really realistic. And if it was a real gunfight, and they had to reenact it, that's showbiz. But anyway, we're here to look at a distinctly decrying of the Hollywood system, breaking down So much so that we can no longer, we still have the optimism of like nerve gas knocking us out to the point that everything's funny. You can smoke weed on this movie, it won't really change your atmosphere of melancholy. That it's about a lady who's homeless, who's taken in by a famous actress, who then gets in a car crash and wanders off. Then the other lady takes her career. Then the lost one gets invited in to the other girl's house, which is the same house, except for now we realize that the rich Hollywood one has a big house right up by Mulholland Drive where they keep walking out of it when they're in the crash. And both of them get in a crash and change places as either best actor or forgotten actor. They have this lesbian love scene, but the point of the movie is actually really cool because David Lynch, he does actually use special effects. Now, one thing I've heard about David Lynch, and I've talked about this a little bit, is I don't know if he really does meditate while he's on set, but clearly his masterclass, which is a holy masterclass, holier masterclass, we see him talking about how he will stand in place and kind of be like about to conduct an orchestra and really take it in slack that he's got this whole thing to build. And so as he meditates, these things just automatically start to happen on the set that were brought there, like a kangaroo will go after a snake or something, or like a clown will jump out of a birthday cake and land in an oil field. I don't know. There's just all these things that could go on while David Lynch meditates. His meditation creates these kind of not really obstructions, but the very view of subjective itself. And the subjective is so Hitchcockianly handled in, like, say, Blue Velvet, where they see that ear and all the ants crawling on it. That's a special effect of, like, a fake ear and just, like, probably real ants. Although I don't know if the Humane Society would let you use real ants in a movie because one of them might get squished in a David Lynch movie, like Eraserhead, where everybody gonna get squished. No, I'm kidding. All right, so anyways, we got Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive. Now, what makes this a particularly today showing film is that it's Hollywood on Hollywood. And we know some things about the Hollywood on Hollywood side of this comes from the player, where the ending was preconceived to be happy in the player just to follow the Hollywood cookie cutter phase of making the ending the Robert Altman happy ending, which Robert Altman movies usually lapse off into like 10 different cuts and then just like die out like shortcuts did, which it kept going and rose and fall, and then there's the earthquake. And it's an editing wonder that they made it through all the editing of Robert Altman's shortcuts, and they were short cuts, that went through the movie. And a movie like that is to truly be heralded by the filmmakers who have connected the pieces that are so diced up that, like, again, Nashville, how Robert Altman did this. And Robert Altman and Sam Peckinpah learned the best editing skills and best sound skills from running switchboards in TV studios and directing TV movies. Because, like we said, TV is not below cinema. It makes more than cinema. It costs more than cinema. And it ends up doing pretty good with commercial TV as well as people getting their ideas across no matter what walk of life they're from. Although the TV does have diaspora, it doesn't cover everything, and sometimes it's narrowcasting where the programmer knows you're the only one watching. How they do this, I'm not going to get into, but they say they know what you're watching when you're on the channel that what they've got playing is on, right? So I don't think it's like some 1984 Brainiac release, but the TV studios are so big, so packed, and take so many people to do that you learn on this grand scale even more wizardry techniques to go into cinema if you want to change to cinema. Some people go from cinema to TV. It's not a demotion either way. They're both incredible. The TV can get across to 500 times more people than the cinema. So what's more incredible, the TV or the cinema? Well, the internet can get it across to everybody right away. Okay, so now it's not what we're getting across, it's how we're getting it across, and it is what we're getting across. And are we different in the internet on TV, or are we showing the same things? And really, if we show the same things, that's cool. Cinema too. These are like venues for the media that define the type of media art that they are. TV, theater, and internet. And Mulholland Drive, my guess, is David Lynch picking up the phone and saying, I'm going to make that film of Hollywood on Hollywood. It's going to be like intrigue, lesbians, doors, uh, people jumping out of 1950s bebop jams. And at first, at the beginning of this movie, there's these cardboard cutouts that remind me of Norman McLaren or something, and it's like this scene where it's in this 50s bebop music's playing, and there's these flash cuts of people that are like, an outline of them will show up and they'll jump off the picture, or an outline will show up of them, they'll walk out the picture, and it's like, they're all getting down and getting with it. That's a beautiful set piece from this movie. Now, set pieces are brought in to be shot on camera. A lot of times, the second unit will film the set piece so that way they can shape it around like it's this Broadway melody kind of montage in, but without distracting you from the fact, and everything's distracting about it, but not distracting you from the fact that David Lynch has every control over this movie. And really, Singing in the Rain was Gene Kelly and Stanley Donen to a slice. I mean, it's not like they had any less control than David Lynch. In fact, you would be surprised at the number of choices that were made for this film were almost all Stanley Donen and Gene Kelly coming up with the plan. That there was not really the collaboration shown in the movie to get the movie made is only because they were like demonstrating that they could make a film not like how they make a film, but how film should ideally be made. Although that's just like a Hollywood way of puffering up and like puffing up how hard it is to make a movie, but now we're making it look easy because the actors are superstars and they can handle the sound transition and all this. Mulholland Drive does a different thing. It takes two lives of two females and piles them into this life of a rich director and some of his friends. And another set piece you get is the Uranda set piece, which is where they're sitting in that theater and there's like a guy that's being dubbed that's singing Crying by, I can't think of who it's by, but not Buddy Holly, but you know who I mean. Anyway, there's this song called Crying, Roy Orbison. And it goes into this llorando, which is Spanish for crying. It's llorando, llorando. And that means I'm crying. And that's what's happening right here in this. And that's a set piece that transfers from one woman to the other, just like Pandora's Box does, just like the teeny tiny grandparents running through the ground. Now, the teeny tiny grandparents running through the ground in a dream sequence is like an anima and animus that got way old and you shouldn't have trusted them in the first place. Like your anima and animus pulls you out of the shadows when you hit dark times. One's male, one's masculine, feminine. In psychology, we all have a masculine and feminine side. See, most of the movies like Singing in the Rain and even before and all the way until about the 60s were filmed in the subject-object mode of spectator sports, so they're like men are always breathing down women's necks and women are always a sexual object. Well, these women are sexual objects, but they're breathing down each other's necks and there is no male role except the ambiguous director who may be in over his head, may be on autopilot directing this film that he is directing and doesn't even really remember if he is or not. And these women rely on feminism in this case to get by. They're like the Laura Dern in the Southland, not Southland Empires. That's a good movie though too. I can't think of Inland Empire with Laura Dern. She's also putting the fantastic job into these like self-reflexive movies. And again, self-reflexive means, get this, it's an artist who conceives his art based on the media it is proposed from as the reason for the aesthetics and the storyline in the art. That's the definition of self-reflexive, and I may make that the final, so check that down. That we may go into self-reflexivity, because wouldn't that be fun for... What's cool about self-reflexivity in special effects films, the special effects are good in like those expressionism films like Caligari and Nosferatu we were talking about. Well, what I theorize is that if they're so heavy on the special effects in those films, in the German expressionism films, is that's because with the special effects you can exaggerate everything, and exaggeration's a great means of cinema. And I don't mean reefer madness like propaganda, like exaggerate what everybody's supposed to believe. I mean, if Jaws is huge when we see him on screen, if Jaws is huge in like our thoughts, maybe when we see him on screen, Jaws is the size of the whole fucking screen, you know. And so it's like positioning of a camera, not just that. You know, you got a Jim Henson type Muppet with the shark. You know, it's like these very cueistic thoughts that are coming up with assembling this together, and I'm sorry for that. And I guess the point is that when you're using special effects to extenuate something, to exaggerate something, you can put bells and whistles on it. Now, I'm not going to tell you too much about this occultic practice that Hollywood classical cinema uses called the chime. But there is actually, throughout every film, there's directors to direct your attention to where your eyes are supposed to go. And every shot in a movie has like a director, no matter how small it is, that's showing you which way the camera's going to move, which way the person's going to move. It has that in it so that you know the relied response of actually having it shined in your eye is going to condition you for whatever direction you're supposed to go in the film screening. Now, I know you think that's a load of hokum. Like, what is he talking about? Like, there's really this way of guiding our eye around the film. Well, anytime there's a glint at the screen, like you look at Charles Lawton with his like eyeglass glint, it's a special effect to evade your privacy, not just self-reflexive that you're watching a movie, but that you're all under the auspice of the lens. And the lens flare itself can even look like a beautiful special effect when a lens flare picks up, especially with digital cameras like in Apocalypse Now. And you look at a movie like Apocalypse Now, and you're always bordering realism and formalism, and was that really how it went, or did they have to recreate it? And was it like Rossellini, where they went and then they saw it and then they recreated it? And my guess, it was probably more like the Rossellini. They went there, they saw it, and then they reenacted it. I don't know if there were collateral deaths in a film. It seems the film's so big that it towers hundreds of $1,000,000, towers tons of studios. It is a studio in and of itself as a movie. It's really hard to say who died during the making, but that a big movie, even a small movie, usually has one person in the cast and crew that says goodbye. And not because of the conditions of the movie. See, the conditions of the movie, in Murnau's case, he shouldn't have driven up that lechy, muddy road when Robert Flaherty was right behind him, and Robert Flaherty must have had a hard time finishing that movie, which Robert Flaherty was the only filmmaker to win a Pulitzer Prize for a film. And it's the only time in history that happens with Louisiana Story, and it's probably because of the social conditions there needed taken attention to real fast. And a lot of things that Pulitzer Prize does are things that need to take you to attention real fast. And the only reason I got one is so then I wouldn't feel lonely in the Roger Ebert Club, because Roger Ebert got one, and I'm like, well, if Roger Ebert can do it, I probably can't. But I'm gonna go down with a fight, and I went down with a fight, and finally, Pulitzer guys are just like, fine, that was enough fighting out of you. These are good things, and good things can happen to you, my students, if you study your films. If you study the type of film that's about the filmmaking process, and in this one, we see the camera several times, we see the movies that we're making on different sets several times, we see how the musical is connected. The two little small guys was an actual digital effect where they shrunk them in the computer and then reprinted them onto the frame and then cranked it slow so they'd look like they were running fast and forward, you know? And the camera, the subjective camera going through the Pandora's box movement is very Hitchcock. I mean, and so you see how even self-reflective directors get quoting other directors. I mean, they'll quote, this guy will quote the jazz singer, and this guy will quote like 1950s Rebel Without a Cause movies, but mostly from a female perspective, is the Mulholland Drive. That the musicals always give credence to women in a better way than subject object, and what helped break down the subject object was musicals, even though they seemed like they were objectified in musicals, which they were still becoming women that could take their own lead role, take their own body, look how they want, feel how they want, and still be the best at everything they do. And isn't that Hollywood? The look the best, the feel the best, the art the best, the get whatever you want attitude. I'm for that, dude. I'm not saying that if like uh, David Lynch comes looking for this particular copy of Mulholland Drive, I'm going to keep it from him. But this one has a couple of scenes in it he hasn't seen, so it's one of those other version ones that I think we picked up that he'd be interested to know was in his film. One of them is an extended cut of the cowboy meeting with the director, and I'm kind of teasing because it's only a second or two different in projection, but just enough to make it a different timed print onto a different print of this DVD. And David Lynch is one of those directors where his movies seem different all the time anyway. Like Eraserhead never is the same movie twice. And it's not just because how they condition the chimes. Because, see, I was talking about playtime and how it looks like a different movie every time, and how they position the chimes is a lot, to where your eyes are going to select each time the film is on, down to about 100 times. So, whether or not that method is real, I think it is, because I've seen movies like Eraserhead again that like change as they go. It changes as it goes. It's like the film is like this distractingly bad, like alien baby has come to ruin this family of like an angry alien mother and this guy who's trying to keep it all good, except intolerance is coming down upon him. He can't get his work done. He's probably a writer building clay figurines to sell them. And he's probably building the clay models for the film that they're making. But this is not the same as self-reflexivity, bar none, which is what these are. Movies about making movies. To make it simple, it's music movies about making movies. And they've had them since the Buster Keaton days. And so, I say we have 3 classes left. If you want to send me some ideas, comments on this video, where we should go with the special effects class, because a lot of this was done on sound and look, and how cameras should be filming cameras to create the Hollywood on Hollywood, which they always do. A camera filming a camera, a camera filming a TV, a camera filming a set. And that's what you can tell your camera is filming a set. You can tell you're using a camera while you're using it, with all the POV shots. And Match on line of action really, Match on sight really does create a POV shot. But the true breakdown of the subject-object position is like saying Debbie Reynolds is an equal character in Singing in the Rain, when she is actually the best character, I think, in Singing in the Rain, the biggest character in it. Gene Kelly is pretty untoppable, though. And in the musical, yeah, they're kind of dolled up. They're kind of faced up to look like what men want. But they've been feminized since the musical back to female. And now we have the Yolanda sequence saying, this is the end of sound film. This is now where Singing in the Rain shows jazz singers starting it all. Mulholland Drive is the end of it all, where everything shuts off, reverses. The homeless become famous, and the famous become homeless. And nobody is none the wiser. Except us, because we took Masterclass, so we got wiser, right? And not Budweiser either. You guys go have a fun day. Oh man, if Harvard gets a hold of this, I wonder what... No, I'm kidding. All right, we're fine. Everybody be cool. See you for 3 more classes of special effects.